and welcome everyone. Last week, the CodeBuild team surprised me with an announcement that I'm going to untangle today with Raphael. Raphael, what are we going to talk about?
Hi, good morning, Johannes. Today we will look at this announcement from last week where AWS announced that they now offer a serverless GitHub Actions runner. So you can easily run your jobs within your AWS account, although your code and your trigger is living in GitHub.
Cool, and we're going to try to set this up today. So in our own GitHub, in our own AWS account. So I would propose, let's get going and let's maybe start with the announcement. Raphael, what do you think?
Sure. So let me share my screen and we'll have a look at the announcement itself. So bring it up. It is basically, nope, that's the wrong one.
That's the other one that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, yeah?
Yeah. So this is the right one. I will make it bigger so everyone can see it. So as I already mentioned, AWS CodeBuild now supports managed GitHub Actions Runner. What that basically means is that AWS offers you to simply connect AWS CodeBuild with GitHub Actions, and whenever there is a workflow run in GitHub triggered, it now doesn't run on GitHub runners, so it runs within your AWS account with all the features like VPC support, CloudTrail support. You can have an IRM role attached to it and easily interact with other AWS resources. And also it offers different types of runtimes, like the newly released Lambda runtime for CodeBuild jobs, or if you need some GPUs for your workflows, you can add an instance type that has GPU support. And as I already mentioned, it's fully managed by AWS. So the only thing you have to manage is the connection between GitHub and AWS itself.
Cool.
So
That sounds fantastic. Sounds like something we should at least try out. I would say let's get started having a look. And then we're going to see, how this maybe connects to Code Catalyst, GitHub Actions running, or why the hell, right? So I think one of the benefits I see is I don't need to really change my YAML files, do I, for my workflows?
if you run already on GitHub Actions, you shouldn't be able. I think you need to modify it. We will have a look at it, what the documentation says, to at least select the other runner type. Instead of a hosted runner, you should select an AWS managed runner. So hopefully that's the only distinction between running on GitHub or AWS.
And obviously the compute bill goes somewhere else, right? So it doesn't go to GitHub anymore. It would go to AWS, and that means AWS makes some more money out of GitHub users with this announcement.
Yeah, but if you think maybe on an enterprise level, that also can be a benefit, because you have a cost allocation for your runners directly to each team or to each AWS account. So on GitHub, I don't know if they have a per team level billing, but with AWS runners, you definitely have them.
Cool.
So
We would need to look a little bit closer into the pricing, I believe, to start comparing those things as well going forward. Maybe someone in the community has an interest in that and can help us build some comparison between costs for these kind of things.
yeah. So a quick disclaimer before we get started. We both, neither Johannes not and then I have tried out this feature yet. So it's the first time for both of us. So we will go through this documentation, how to set it up together with the audience and Johannes especially. And let's see how far we get. So first thing is, in the announcement, there's directly a setup CodeBuild project or documentation or blog post linked. So probably we should start with that.
Yeah, let's do that. And let's see
Okay.
if we have all of the prerequisites already fulfilled or not.
So let's make sure it's the right blog article. Okay, it's product page, self-hosted runner. Let's start with the setup update. Yeah, that should be the right one. Okay, create a CodeBuild project with a webhook. In this step, we will create a CodeBuild project, webhook, GitHub console. Open the AWS CodeBuild console. So I am already logged into an AWS account of mine. So I don't have any build projects yet. So maybe split the screen. Oh no, probably not so good for the
And
sizes. So they
the,
said,
So this is supported in all regions, right? So the region doesn't matter. So in all regions that CodeBuild exists, so we can go with either region, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I hope so. So right now we are in Ireland. That should be fine.
Good.
So probably create. First thing is AWS create a build project console. So let's create a build project. Project is cicd with Johannes. Source. So source should be probably GitHub.
I would guess so, yeah.
And let's try to connect to GitHub.
Using OAuth.
So let's authenticate. So we probably need a new GitHub repository for that. So just go over to GitHub and create a new repository, I'd suggest. So new repository, and is cicd with and let's make it public. Add a README to initialize, and we are good to go.
Looks good.
So hopefully we can now select it within the search. Maybe refresh.
I think you need to set up the webhook as well. Then. Okay, we're not there yet. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just trying to follow along and.
So I take the URL from the GitHub repository, put it in. Okay, and here it's already coming up, and that's optional. So let's go over. That was the first step in source for repository. Primary source webhook events. So for webhook, optional, select rebuild every time a code change is pushed to the repository. So, okay, that's this checkbox. Rebuild every time a code change is pushed to this repository. And then the second thing is event type.
Yeah.
Job queued. That's probably here. And it was workflow job queued. Okay, that looks simple. And then next step is environment. Choose a supported environment, image, or compute. So now we define which kind of CodeBuild runners we want, or what resource type, basically, I think we will support.
Yep.
So we probably will use an on-demand environment, managed image, and
I would go with EC2 initially, or because then we can do whatever we want, right? And we're not bound to a runtime. But obviously Lambda would be faster.
We can try that out later, maybe. So what do we need to have for operating system, or does the compute?
I think it doesn't matter, and we can even override it later when using the functionality. So let's go with Amazon Linux for now and the standard runtimes, and then.
Okay, so next thing is probably the IRM role for this instance type. So, of course, create a new role. The name is fine. So 1 hour timeout should be enough. Queue timeout, 8 hours. I think we can leave all these things on the default. For our purpose, 3 GB memory, 2 VPC virtual CPU should be enough. We don't need a VPC. So if you have some connections to some other resources that run in a VPC, this would be probably the place to configure the VPC the engine should be running.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. So what's next? In environment, we selected the correct one. In build spec, note that your build spec will be ignored. Instead, CodeBuild will override the user commands that will set up the self-hosted runner. This project primary responsibility is to set up a self-hosted runner in CodeBuild to run Artifact. So it looks like although if the repository has a build spec, it will be ignored and will use the GitHub Actions workflow fly.
Yep, that's how it looks like. So let's just move ahead then with that.
Okay, so let's create that. Something we missed. Build commands.
We can ignore them, I guess. So we need to use a build spec file, I guess, right? And then we can move on.
Let's see. Okay, we have a build project. So maybe, Johannes, can you quickly explain what is a build project and what are the other tools we have like deploy and pipeline? What is CodeBuild in this case?
Well, yeah, of course. So CodeBuild is really kind of only a build tool itself. So you can execute Gradle, Maven, NPM builds, Python builds, whatever to package up your software. And the output of a CodeBuild step should usually be either test results or it should be an artifact that would be created out of it, right? So you can really think of it like a small step within your CI/CD pipeline that is executing some commands for you, right? That can produce then artifacts or anything else.
Cool.
In contrary to code deploy, where you then actually try to get these artifacts deployed out to different environments. Now, this is, from my perspective, it's still a little bit of an interesting thing to see because GitHub Actions usually doesn't really treat it like that, right? So in GitHub Actions and also in GitLab and also, it's really just an executable piece of work that is going to happen in one step within your CI/CD workflow or CI/CD file. And this is where these CodeBuild runners at the end come into play, right? So essentially GitHub and GitHub has that possibility. Code Catalyst also has that possibility to have specific runners or images being executed for just certain steps. And this is what we're going to really look at here, right? It powers the compute for your CI/CD pipeline. And in this case, hopefully it's going to be truly serverless for us in the same way that GitHub Actions usually is also executing them on areas that you don't see, right? But in an enterprise, that's what can be very difficult is to choose where will your GitHub Actions be executed actually, right? So where's the compute power that powers your build? And this announcement makes that simpler.
Yes. Also, if you have some compliance reasons where you need to have at least some control or reasons to encrypt special things, so GitHub Copilot, GitHub Actions is fully out of control. I think with CodeBuild, you probably have some more influence on. As we all mentioned, we have more images to select from, and
yeah, we also stepped over the place where we could configure VPC connectivity and these kind of things, which is kind of one of the most difficult things usually in an enterprise environment, right? How do you make GitHub Actions runners execute in your own VPC and connect it somewhere, right? So I know of enterprises that are setting up an EKS cluster to then execute GitHub runners on that one, right? And this essentially takes this away.
Yeah, for example, if you run it in VPC, you can limit the outbound traffic and make sure, although you might have some malicious or bad code executing, it's not able to talk to the outside internet to push some secrets to the outside. So, or you can monitor all that traffic that it goes through. So it's probably very helpful for enterprise setup. So let's continue with the tutorial. So next thing is, we need to set up the webhook itself. So what it probably does is GitHub provides a webhook API. So whenever something happens in GitHub, it will publish an event to this configured webhook API, and we
It
probably send
essentially
to
it essentially says that we would already have a webhook now because of that connectivity that we set up. So let's see if the webhook has been set up actually for the repository that you choose. And at least, as I said, I'm trying to follow along, right? So for me, the webhook has also been set up automatically. Same for you?
There is a webhook pointing to CodeBuild, AWS, and it's let's have a look at it. So it is pointing to some AWS resource with some token in the URL, and it is SSL verification enabled, and it is publishing not all the events of the repository, probably only the relevant ones, like when there is a pull request, when there are some pushes to the repository, when there are releases created, and of course when there are workflows queued. So whenever one of these events happen, it will invoke a payload that is sent to the AWS endpoint, and from there on, the AWS control plane takes over and or data plane takes over and triggers the build jobs probably. Okay.
Now, the setup that we did so far would be something that you could also do in infrastructure as code, right? So we did that manually now for the simplicity of showcasing this, but I could also script this in Terraform, CloudFormation, or whatever.
Yes. So next thing is basically in the GitHub side. So in this step, we will set up GitHub Actions workflow in GitHub to configure and use this self-hosted runner. So, okay, first of all, we probably need to have some kind of workflow flow. Okay, we can directly use that one from the tutorial. So let's copy that and add this file. So we will go over to our repository and add a GitHub Actions workflow file. So is there basically is getting started, simple workflow, and we will fully override this file. And so we probably need to replace some of these values. So the project name is, okay, we need to replace the project name, and the project name is probably this one. So copy over the project name from CodeBuild and replace it with this dummy value.
So here, this is kind of interesting at the end, right? Because now my first question would be, do I need to have it all uppercase or lowercase or whatever, right? Because even though I don't know.
We will see. If we run into errors, we probably can try out to do all lowercase.
So in my example on my side, I chose to use all lowercase names, but as the same way as you did, I have dashes in it, which is going to be interesting if that actually works or not.
I hope they don't do any parsing on dashes.
Let's see.
Okay, so what is also interesting is that I have to specify a run ID and run attempt within my run on specification, because intuitively the machine type is always the same, so they probably pass some information from the run from the payload that's invoked by the webhook API.
I would say this is just the best practice implementation to be able to kind of see how they match to each other, right? I don't think that there is anything more sophisticated.
Okay, so we can also do other things with this pattern and override some parameters, like use a different kind of, or select the correct image version and instance sizes. That's also interesting. So,
but yeah, is that good
how
for
do you
an
configure that
enterprise?
on an AWS side?
Yeah, I don't know, but so I'm not sure if I even like that, because that gives flexibility to product teams that they maybe should not have from a central perspective. What do you think about that?
I'm curious how that actually works, because it gives the teams more flexibility to select the instance type, but from a governance perspective, if I define a code build job with one instance types and then my users can totally override the setting, it feels a little bit confusing actually.
Okay.
I don't know, do we have a capability to specify multiple instance types in a code build project? Do you know that?
Well, we could select them when setting up the code build project. So far, we could have decided on the possible options there, right? Which compute we do want to offer. So usually you configure that for a project, and then you have multiple instance types that you can choose on, right? But here now in this option, you can on demand for each of the steps where you execute on code build decide which image is going to be used. Interesting. Let's see.
We can maybe change our workflow later to some other instance type besides the default one and see if this overrides works.
Yep.
So, okay, here we have a list of all the available instance types, but we won't override that for now. And that's it. So we probably can save this file or basically commit. We call it blank. Why not? Commit changes, create plugable. Okay, let's see if there's already a workflow running. Yeah, it is triggered.
Cool.
And let's see. First of all, that's a normal way of looking at workflows in GitHub Actions, and we are waiting for the AWS runner to pick up the job. Let's go over to AWS and see if there is something running already. Okay.
Cool.
So at least we set up the connections between GitHub and AWS, and we triggered our first build that is running on a managed GitHub Actions runner.
That was fast, right?
That was fast and easy, actually. Oh, we have a nice banner. Let's see if you can see the logs on. Oh, yeah, we see them here as well. Maybe it would be interesting if they are live streamed to GitHub Actions, or if I can see them only afterwards. So if you have a long-running task, if I can see the logs streaming in the same manner that they are streamed in on the native GitHub Actions file, because that's always quite helpful if after running a GitHub pull request or something like that, to see directly the logs in the same application, don't have to switch over to AWS and see the logs there. So maybe we can try that again.
Let's try again and see.
I think we need to do some more work in the workflow file, because it's only one line command. So what else can we do? Should we extend the pipeline first, or should we try out another instance type first?
Let's try another instance type first.
Okay. So let's modify the workflow. Okay, so the documentation says basically we can simply add the runs on command with the image version, and instance size. So for now we had probably an Amazon Linux default. So I would personally be interested in running a Lambda runtime. Do we have a Lambda runtime?
For that, yeah, well,
it's the image. Oh, it's the image size.
It's the image. Yeah. So for Lambda runtime, you would need to change the code build project, right? I guess. So we can only choose the image type here, I would guess.
So let's try the Ubuntu. So it's probably something like that. Image identifier. Okay, I hope that's image identifier, but the version is already built in, so we need to separate them with hash. Let's try that one. It's okay, it's running. Or waiting for AWS to pick up.
Yeah, I would assume that this is faster if we use Lambda, this pickup, right?
Yeah, hopefully. Actually doesn't pick up the job.
Then we did something wrong.
Maybe the documentation has a troubleshooting guide. Let's see. Review results. Okay, that was the happy path. So that is for matrix builds. So there are some examples how to specify them, and if I look up on the table, it is not the image identifier. Oh, the image is okay. We don't need the image identifier. We probably need a concatenation of image, version, and then some size. And we did use this image identifier. That's probably why it's not picking up the job. So let's fix that. So we decided to go with, I think we said Ubuntu 7.0, and we use a large runner. Why not? Ubuntu 7.0 / large.
Maybe now we have too many dashes. So
Out of dash exception.
yeah, well, if they pass on the dashes, your project name is not helpful.
At least it's triggering, so some kind of parsing is working.
That's true. Can you check the compute size here? So if you go in the build run, on the build run itself, you can click on that one, and there you can see, hopefully, if you scroll down, the details.
Face details, or
I'm just checking myself.
build
The build details, I would go.
Yeah,
and there we should see the environment piece, the environment which then should show us now the Ubuntu image.
That should be the image identifier from the documentation.
Yes, that looks good.
It's also bigger. So it doesn't feel like the logs are streamed in just after the build succeeded. You can see the logs.
And as we are on this thing, if you can go down again on this picture on the left-hand side, on the screen on the left-hand side, there is the role that is being used. Now, we could set up the role relevant for this, right? So next question. So I can now give this service role the permissions that I actually want, only to do specific things. Now my next question would be, can I have a specific role per step in my GitHub workflow? So I would say for the build steps, I might have just no permissions to do deployments. But if I then have deploy permissions, can I specify the role for a specific step in my GitHub Actions?
So there is GitHub Action steps to assume a role. So I imagine if the service role has the permission to assume another role, you can easily call this assume role action and assume the correct role to deploy to a different account within these steps or job.
Yeah, but that's not gonna work because now CodeBuild executes the role. Now CodeBuild executes the actions. Yeah, you mean okay? Yeah, I could. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. We could do that. We could then have an GitHub action that assumes a different role.
Yeah. So the action itself is using the default AWS credentials chain, I think, to make some other API call to assume this new role. So I hope it should work. We can try it out, but I don't know time-wise if we have enough time for that.
Good question. I don't
So maybe let's have a look at the service role, what it already has and permissions, and then
let's have a look on the log files again, right? I think we covered that partly just a minute ago, but let's do it again.
So from the native thing, we already have S3 access, CodeBuild, create report. So we definitely need to expand this policy or these roles to do some stuff, as it looks like we don't have much of permissions out of the box. So we could not probably run CDK in it or something in an AWS account. And also, but it totally makes sense because if you're running, you always have to define the least privileged permissions on yourself. So that's okay. So I personally would set up probably a different role for each environment. So if I say, okay, I have a role that is allowed to deploy to my development environment or a review environment, you specify a role with all these things that should be possible to do from the CI pipeline in this different environments, and then assume this role within my GitHub Actions flow. So I only have to specify one role for the deployment in the account, and then the GitHub Actions runner should only have the permissions to assume this role and do then stuff with this role as a best practice, I think we can say.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so you want to go back at the log files, or?
Yeah, let's try the log files again to see if they tail automatically. So for that, maybe we need to add a, I don't know, loop or whatever in the...
Maybe we can add a more sophisticated pipeline. Also interesting if the runners show up here. So yeah, there are some self-hosted runners. Okay, they are not visible in the GitHub Actions.
Well, they can't because they are serverless, so they will be gone again after being used, right?
That's right.
But you will always see the ones that are currently active. So I can just quickly, can you stop your screen share for a second, and I can show on my side. So as you can see, oh come on, I wanted to share a Chrome tab and somehow it's not working. Yeah, that's what you should not do, right? Just switch over screen share. Anyway, so that's what you kind of see over here. There is a runner that is currently active that is doing some stuff, right? But the moment that it is finished, it will go away again, right? Also now you see that at least, and I just have that ready. So over here you see that it tails down the log files, Raphael, So that was the
That's
second
cool.
thing. The second thing we wanted to do. What I don't know how much delay there is, right? So this is a little bit more sophisticated because that's a project that I've been working on. Let's have a look if you should. So
I think that's very valuable because that was a thing that I was missing in the old integration part with GitHub. So there was already some ways of connecting code build runners with GitHub already, but they were
yeah, but
basically fire off some events, and then after the execution was done, it was just reporting or just linking back to GitHub and saying, "Hey, if you want to look at the logs, here your log files." Or
yeah,
so this.
well, this is good. This is good. What I don't understand yet is these log files here, right? I haven't been able to see them here in the code build console, which might be correct, right? I don't know about that. But essentially what and maybe you can help me with that, right, is these are the log files on how the code build runners have been set up and started. Okay. Now, these are the log files of the build itself. Should I now see them on AWS? If yes, would they be on CloudWatch or where would they be?
Okay, that's interesting. So what you say is on code build, you only see basically the orchestrating part of the logs, and the actual execution logs are not visible in the build logs itself. That's interesting.
I haven't found them yet, right? So here I see connected to GitHub, I see runner settings, I see connected to GitHub again, and I see it succeeded the build or whatever, right? And then I didn't yet find these log files, which were the actual build statements.
Okay, so there are some log groups attached to the runner. I'm not sure. Maybe you can have a look at that and see if we see them there, or maybe to get the managed runtime, just push the data or the logs directly to GitHub, so you don't have to pay for the logs twice. Maybe that's an optimization they did.
I don't know. What would be funny is what happens if I trigger retry build here now.
I don't see a problem. It just reports back to GitHub that there's another run. So
potentially. Well, these are the same logs of the 3 runs, I would guess. And as you can see, these are just... Which kind of makes sense, right? Because at the end, the agent will be reporting back the log files to to GitHub, right? And that's where the logs will then be stored, is my understanding.
Yeah. Also, as a user of the repository, I wouldn't go back to AWS console to see some logs if I already have them in the tool I want to use, in this case, the GitHub Action tab. So I'm totally fine with not having those logs.
I'm still thinking, to be honest.
Okay, so now, Johannes, you've seen this integration for GitHub natively integrating to AWS, but what other solutions did you know of to connect a GitHub repository or a Git repository in general with AWS and have your runners run in an AWS environment? I know you're a CI/CD expert for AWS, so I hope you can give us some insights. What other options do we have besides this, I think, nice integration for GitHub?
So I think it really simplifies a lot. You don't really need to take care of how to set up the runners and then execute stuff on your AWS premises at the end, right? So that makes things way easier to set up than at least I saw it before. I think previously you were able to trigger code pipeline builds from GitHub. But then obviously the change happens, right? That then all of the pipeline execution is being executed on the AWS side. And that means also the orchestration is there. Now with this feature, the orchestration stays in GitHub. It starts the workflows. It also visualizes the steps as we saw, right? And previously there was a breaking change for the user who needed to then go into the AWS console and look at the code pipeline. So I think that's definitely an interesting change, right? Well, that's on the GitHub integration. I have some more thoughts around where this all fits into the strategic view of Amazon developer tools, right? Which I don't understand, frankly. But maybe there's a reason for doing this and for matching existing customers. What's your take, Raphael?
So, as in many customer projects I work for, we use GitHub as our source repository, and I don't see a switch there to move over to native AWS tools, although all the workload itself is running on AWS. So for this use case, it's very nice to have this integration ready without to manage any resources or instances. And also for compliance reasons, because often you need this VPC access. You need to have some rules in place to manage the runners on your own. And with this, we can probably have some sweet spot between not have to manage your own runners, but still run in a safe environment that is only dedicated to you as a AWS customer. So for these use cases, it's very helpful. What I would be interested in is how that maybe can play together with Code Catalyst. So Code Catalyst has this nice blueprints feature to manage your repository, and so you could use Code Catalyst to provision and manage your repositories with blueprints, but then the actual development part is running in GitHub, and the developers don't have to use this new environment, need to learn this new Code Catalyst environments and concepts there, but so they can continue, but you still have the governance features for Code Catalyst. What do you think about that?
So today, blueprints do not work for GitHub repositories, as far as I know. So you can only use blueprints for Code Catalyst hosted source code repositories. For me, the main challenge is that we're putting our developers in front of a lot of different tools. The more different tools we have, the more the complexity is in how to understand how things are being executed. While I like the feature of blueprints and custom blueprints in Code Catalyst, getting them into GitHub and executing things on GitHub on that side, right, has two tools. And then you have the part where the CI pieces are executed, which might be a totally different thing. I'm more for streamlining things and staying in one environment or in one overview at the end, or one UI at the end, because that really simplifies the way that people interact with some stuff, right? So here, my take is, if you are on GitHub, this functionality keeps you in the GitHub ecosystem, but enables you to quickly execute your builds on your own AWS environment. If you are into Code Catalyst, right, then that helps if you have that one user interface. And that's why what I said earlier was like, okay, a lot of the cool features of Code Catalyst are being backported to CodeBuild, Code Pipeline, and these kind of things. Where does that fit into the strategy of making Code Catalyst like the one and only place to go at AWS cicd and developer tools? That doesn't really fit into that strategy. And so that's my take on all of that, right? Maybe Amazon or AWS is big enough to invest into multiple different developer tools, right? And Code Pipeline 2.0 was a great step into a actually usable CI/CD tool as well. But I'm missing that focused thing, right? That would be my take on that.
That's a good point, because often it gives now another option to do CI/CD with AWS, and as a consultant as I am in my daily work, it got a little bit harder the more options you have. So now customers you can run managed runners on AWS. You can run CodeBuild jobs on AWS. You have CDK pipelines to run multi-step pipelines that are built on CodeBuild, but can also run on GitHub Actions. And you have Code Catalyst that have another kind of workflow file, for example, syntax, but solves the same problems. All you want is have a commit deployed to some environments. So we have now another option to do that. Let's see which one will be the best one for your option for your future projects. And
yeah, I think we're missing out on that pricing comparison. Like if I do pay for GitHub Action Runners on GitHub compared to CodeBuild runners, compared to self-hosted GitHub runners, which might be running on an EKS cluster or whatever, right? There is definitely also a decision to take from that input perspective. And it also depends on your own organization what the right thing to do is, right? You will not use this feature if you're using GitHub Actions to deploy into Azure, right? But if you're all on AWS and want to manage permissions on the IAM side, that might be something for you. Raphael, thank you so much. This was great fun. Was a great deep dive into this new functionality. Thanks a lot for sharing and for showing us your experiences with it. Where can people find more about you? I think a lot of people should know you these days, but maybe not everyone. So where can they find you and reach out to you?
So since this year, I'm also an AWS community builder. So if you are part of the community builder program, you can reach me there on the Slack channel. Besides that, if you want to meet me in real life, I'm also running an AWS user group in southern Germany in Karlsruhe. We try to have a meeting at least once a month to share AWS knowledge in person. And so check out the meetup group of Karlsruhe. And if we are remotely, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to connect with me. My first name, last name, Raphael Manke. If you type that in on LinkedIn, you probably find me. And yeah, that's the easiest way to get in touch with me.
And the next possibility to meet you in person, I think, is also at the AWS Summit in Berlin, as far as I know. And that in-person meetup is something that you've recently talked about with Alan on his podcast as well. So I'm going to link those show notes as well. Pretty interesting conversation around why it makes so big, huge difference to see each other face-to-face instead of through this online video tools. And I cannot agree more to that. Thank you for bringing that message across, Raphael.
Yeah, it was fun being on the podcast with Alan. And one quick remark, if you want to see me in person, I'm also in the next meetup in Munich on the 7th of May. So if you're around Munich, happy to chat with you there.
Cool. Bye-bye.
Bye.